In this third episode of the Long Live Cinema Show, I got the chance to speak with Lead Editor Antara Lahiri. She's an FTII alumnus and has worked in a lot of projects, and she has also worked as an assistant editor in films like Ghajini and Delhi 6. Her recent project was Tooth Pari, that became number one on Netflix. And in this conversation, we talked a lot about the process of editing a web series, a film, what it takes to be an editor in the industry, and what all can you expect from this job of being an editor. This was a lovely conversation, and if you are interested in the world of film editing, you will definitely love this episode. And in case you do, make sure you hit the like button and also don't forget to share this video. Now, without any further delay, sit back, relax, and let's start the show. So, first of all, congratulations on the success of Tooth Pari. The show has
Thank you.
garnered such a huge viewership, 3.3 million hours of watch time, if I'm correct, and it's number one on Netflix. And I'm sure it must be a great feeling, right?
Absolutely. I think, and more than anything else, I have to say, I'm really, really happy for Protein, the director. Um, because, for us, even though, like, for someone like me, I've spent a year and a half working on the series. But for someone like Protein, who's the creator, writer, director, he spent years and years. And I know for a fact how passionately he's kind of, worked to bring this series, to where it is right now. So I think more than anyone else, I'm really happy for him. And of course, it's always great when anything you work on is appreciated. I mean, I'm okay with not the work not being appreciated either. But I think it just for the team as such, it's always nice when there is a certain kind of response that you had anticipated and you get that response. That's always good for the team.
Absolutely. It's because ultimately, it's like playing a cricket match. You need a batsman, you need a bowler, you need
Yeah.
a 12th man as well, you need a coach. So when you win the match, it's the victory of the team.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I was watching the first four episodes, and so far so good. It's been a good ride so far. What I really like the most till now is actually the set design that has been done for the underground vampire world, and I found it very fascinating. But touching on the editing that I could notice is that, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that the speed of the plot is progressing in such a way that it makes me feel like watching an episode is just a breeze. It's just happening quickly, that you are not letting the camera stop for quite a long time, as opposed to something like a Delhi crime, which I would love to talk about. And so I wanted to know that for the pacing of the show, did you always have this particular editing treatment in your mind, or this was something that was decided later in the process?
So typically, with the OTT in general, the idea is always to keep things moving because we have to understand that this is not a captive theatrical experience. It's so simple right now to just, at the click of a button, you can just tune out and, even so much as like you don't want to watch the first 5 minutes if they don't engage you enough. So with OTT, fortunately, unfortunately, that's become the language to keep things pacey. We'll get to Delhi Crime, of course, because that was a whole different, there was a different context also to it because there was a season one which had been made in a particular manner. And also the nature of the show. But with Tooth Pari in particular, it was always, I think, Protim hadn't necessarily envisioned it as something that would be sort of taking its own time to develop, more so because we've got so many stories. The more you proceed beyond episode 4 as well, there's a lot it's a very dense narrative and there's a lot happening. So there is a need to move from one story to the other faster, otherwise you kind of tend to start missing, or there'll be a gap in the storytelling, or you'll feel that there's an absence of the other story. So there was a requirement definitely to move between these stories at a particular pace. Also, it's not, The thing with Delhi Crime, for instance, is that's a police procedural. So by nature of procedurals, these are not thrillers. These are it kind of shows you the kind of time it would take almost in real life. It mirrors that in a sense. And well, we know real life policing isn't this rapid fire sort of doesn't have that rapid fire sort of pacing, which is why Delhi Crime has the kind of pacing that it does. With something like Tooth Pari, which I mean, it's really hard for me even now to categorize it into a particular genre. It's by default, it's fantasy. But the genre as such is very pulpy. So it just makes sense to give that movement and keep things moving at all times and keep it really high engagement in that sense.
Right. Sorry, I blanked out. I'm so sorry. So
Yeah.
yeah. Okay. Great. So now speaking of Delhi Crime, like Delhi Crime is definitely one of my favorite shows ever to come out on Netflix India, especially because of how it's like it's locking the viewer's perspective to the person in front of the camera. That is why you have those long handheld camera takes, and you are deliberately not, putting a cut. Like generally, I think you have to show, like, if there is a shot, you have, let's say, three different perspectives, and you can keep cutting in between them. But this is something that you are not doing. So I would love to know, how was it working with Delhi Crime? And because that show, I always keep coming back to it because of how it maintains the thrill, the adventure of the show, and also it keeps the seriousness intact. So I would love to know, how was it working with Delhi Crime, on Delhi Crime?
Yeah. So the thing was that I had done the pilot episode of season two, and we already had a precursor with season one. So in a sense, there is a background already, and you know the characters, you know the milieu. So it in that sense, it's easier. But to continue at that level was really the challenge. That season two can't be lesser than season one in any way. And one of the things with season one was that it was such an immersive experience. And therefore, I think, and these long handheld sort of takes. Also, I would give big props to the cast because they are extremely, like, you can do handheld takes and long handheld takes, and they may not necessarily sustain if a performance doesn't sustain, or if an actor's silence doesn't sustain. And there are a lot of silences in season two in particular. um, so I think it's a combination of the way it's written, directed, the performances, um, all of that kind of comes together to give you the kind of pacing that you can eventually create. So it is really very collaborative, firstly, and I think everyone functions at the top of their game on that show. Um, and um, so i then when the editors come into the picture, actually it's very easy, I have to say, because you've got it in the footage. A lot of times if you don't have it in the footage, then it's harder for editors to create something out of nothing. With DC2 in particular, I can say that it was already there in the footage. So the pacing, and also we had a lot of discussion, my co-editors and the director, myself, we had a lot of discussions amongst ourselves as to what the pacing, what the rhythm should be. In the first episode in particular, which is what I worked on, I think there was a lot of clarity between me and the director that we're not going to rush it. Because, I mean, the plot is what it is. It's a, this happened, this happened, this happens, and then they're investigating the crime. But I think the beauty of that episode lies in the pacing. And that was always the intention, that we're not going to rush it. We're going to really hold on these shots. Our director had taken a bunch of these CCTV cameras, close ups and stuff. And one of the very, like, one of the first, the introductory shots actually is that of a camera which looks like a Wally sort of face. And you really stay on that camera then it starts raining within that shot. And I had a difference of opinion with my director on that particular shot, because I was like, I'm not sure, why are we holding on this? Why are we holding on this? And then I did slowly, as we aligned in the course of the edit, as we aligned the way we are looking at the edit, I think we were able to give that pacing to a lot of the other shots. And the interesting thing with CCTV cameras is that the longer you kind of linger, you begin to see faces in them, and there's that feeling of being watched by that face, which is what we were hoping to achieve anyway. So I think, yeah, a little bit of things already being there in the footage, and a little bit of creating these moments are what help the pacing of that.
Right. And like you just mentioned this word immersiveness. So if
Yeah,
we talk about the one that you edited, season 2, episode 1, there is a scene when in the beginning itself, when our characters are getting the call to arrive on the spot where the incident has happened, and when the character of Rasika Duggal is at her house and she gets the call.
yeah,
So
yeah,
the camera is following her. She gives the paratha to her husband and she says ki, "Are mummy ji car leke chali gayi." Udhar se the camera is switching between the focuses, but it is not cutting. So you
yeah.
show that the kind of seriousness, the conflict that they are going to be a part of. So this is something that I always loved watching in Delhi Crime. And I'm sure editing a show like this must have been a fantastic experience for you as well.
Yes,
So
absolutely. Yeah.
yeah. And now, since we are talking, like you just mentioned, that working as an editor on a project in which you already get the footage and everything. So I would like you to touch a little bit more upon the process of you right from coming on board for a project and delivering the final product, making those final renders and just sharing the files. So can you just give a rundown of the process?
Yeah. So actually, it's different on different projects, depending on the format. Like if we're doing a series, of we're doing a theatrical, the approach is very different. And also depending on what are the timelines and deadlines involved. But largely, I think if I narrow it down, the first thing is really to read the script. I like to read the script once in the beginning and once during the edit, and then not refer to it too much, because after a point, you have to leave the script behind. So that is one very important step. Then the second step is definitely to gather the right people around me, so the associate editor and the assistant editor. These are two very, very crucial parts of the edit team, and I think we don't, as a rule, we don't end up giving them the kind of importance that they should be given, because they are really the fulcrum of post production. And if you don't have the right associate, you don't have the right assistant editor, you're going to have a really, really hard time working through the project. So, of course, yeah, so hiring these two people, and after that, we get into, on a daily basis, we keep getting, I usually like to come on board like when the shooting is still on. So ideally, from day one of the shoot itself, I should be able to watch the footage and be able to have discussions with the director. And once the shoot is over, then we kind of, do a first cut from the perspective of what I think should be in the edit. And I do kind of clarify that there are things that instinctively I feel I may not necessarily see in the edit, and I will kind of change those around as I go. So that understanding is usually there. Rarely there are directors who like to keep it exactly as per script, but in which case I do make an alternate cut, which is closer to what I think should be there, eventually there. And
That is the editor's cut. Like we have a director's cut, so there is an
there
editor's
is an
cut.
editor's, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So eventually, I do feel like once the editor's cut happens, very rarely has it happened, at least in the last few years, where the director's cut has been like the editor's cut has been completely off. the vision of the director. So I think it really helps me to have a lot of discussions with the director before they even get into shoot. And even while they're in shoot, I think it really aligns our perspectives. And the editor's cut, therefore, doesn't become a hindrance. Like, I would never want it to be a misstep or something which is completely different from what, the film should be. I mean, of course, it is also important to not 100% pander to what the director wants, because the whole idea of you coming on board is that you're providing that second perspective, right? So definitely there is a lot of my perspective that is woven into the editor's cut, but also kind of always keeping at the back of my mind what the ultimate vision of the director is. And then we kind of arrive at the director's cut. Like, I have to say, with Tooth Pari in particular, it was so easy working with Protein. I think what also helps is that we do have similar references. We are both from Calcutta. We are both from the same college. We did the same course, the mass communication course in St. Xavier's College, Calcutta. So it helps to, because I know every time he refers to something, I know what he's talking about. So it really helps aligning our perspectives. And he was also remarkably open to changing things around in the edit, considering he's a writer also, the writer of the series as well. And a lot of times I find that writer directors are very attached to their material. And so it's a tougher fight to kind of, if something is not working, which invariably, there are things which will not translate from a script to screen for various reasons. Pratim was extremely flexible, I have to say, from that perspective. And I have to say, a lot of the success of the series is also due to that. That he maintained his vision. Like, this, it's such a fine balance, really, to maintain that vision, but also allow for other perspectives to filter through. So yeah, so that is largely the process. And once you have with OTT in particular, there are like rounds of changes, edit changes that happen. So once you have the director's cut, that's not the end of it. It goes to the network, and there's a network cut that happens. The network gives feedback. So there are 3 or 4 such rounds that happen with the network. And once that the network is satisfied and the director is satisfied, the showrunner is satisfied, then we kind of lock the edit, and then it goes forward to visual effects and background music and sound design and all of that. So that's pretty much, I think, and this process, I think, is pretty much common to most editors.
I see. Great. So coming to the fact that since you and everyone else on a project are, bringing all their creative energies together, but if we speak individually, like you as a lead editor working on a show or a film, so I'm sure creativity is something that doesn't just start brimming all of a sudden, right? There is a particular time of the day, particular schedule, a particular regime that one maintains so that you can get into that zen mode ki yaar काम करना है and काम खत्म करना है. So I would love to know that as an editor, when you are working on a project, like for example, Veerdas keeps sharing that every morning 6 to 8 he just writes, and he writes. There is no particular topic, but he just writes so that he becomes a good writer. So I want to know that, is there any particular time in the day for you when you feel that yes, my creative juices are flowing at the maximum levels, and let's just get started with, and you get the maximum work done?
I think, I mean, that has been an evolving process, really. One thing which I feel very strongly, what happens with editors in our industry is that there is a tendency for all of us to get overwhelmed with the process, and not in a good way, because it kind of hinders your creativity more than anything else, because the hours are long. And if you are kind of succumbing to those kind of pressures, you have very little time left to yourself. And I think what is also part of the problem is that the assumption is that editors work round the clock. I don't know where this has come from, but there are post supervisors who have asked my team, for instance, that आप लोग तो 24 घंटे काम करने वाले हो ना. So the assumption is always that you will not have a life. So by the time you kind of have grown in your career and in your life generally, to a point where you kind of acknowledge these issues, is when, like, and that happened for me and for a lot of my colleagues much later, like in the last probably, and it's probably like, that lockdown, COVID lockdown related, where a lot of us had this realization that we're not doing enough for ourselves. So that has taken time to formulate that, you can have this time for yourself to do something. And it's very, very important. I think what you do outside of the edit informs what you do in the edit, as with any other creative field, really. So for me, I think specifically what has been very important, for instance, is taking time out to work out at least for half an hour to an hour as often as I can, or even as simply as, taking a walk outside, after dinner, take some time out and go. But there are days where you don't even get that. If there is a deadline, the the nature of work is such that you get very little time to yourself. But I do also, the other thing I am trying is to work more from my own space, versus going to a studio as much as possible, because it really saves those at least 2 hours of travel in Bombay, particularly. Like anywhere you go, it's going to take you at least an hour. So those are the kind of changes, I mean, one does hope to implement, but I think it's still, for me at least, in a very nascent stage. Because as I said, like till now, my whole life kind of revolved around the edit and the edit room. So yeah, I'm still exploring that space.
Yeah, and you were also mentioning during our very first conversation that from next month onwards you will be working on a new project. So you have
Yeah,
you have taken this time out for a time off for yourself.
yeah,
So
yeah.
can you give us a little teaser of what is going to be your next project, or is it under wraps? And it's fine if it's under
Yeah, yeah, I don't think, because I haven't yet signed any contracts.
okay.
So I think once, I mean, that kind of will take a little bit of time. But yeah, I've got a couple of weeks to myself, and I was able to go back to my film institute. I conducted a workshop there. I've had some time to read. That is something I really miss, because I used to be a really avid reader. And of course, like back in Calcutta, it really enables you, like, to do these things,
Right.
because there are libraries and there are spaces where you can go, and I really miss that in Bombay in particular, because like in the suburbs and stuff, there isn't much to really do that way. In FTII also, we had a beautiful library back in the day. So I think those things are what I miss, and these I'm trying to kind of use this time in between to get back to that as much as possible.
So I think I cannot go ahead in this conversation without asking what are you reading right now?
So I'm actually, lately I've developed a fascination for reading a lot of nonfiction. And I'm reading something called The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, which is, I think, highly recommended reading.
Yeah.
Uh,
I'm looking at it because I also have
oh,
yes,
know,
yes, yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think it's just it. That, and there's another book called Psychology of Money, which is also something that I'm reading. So it's been. I never thought I'd be much of a nonfiction reader, because, like, even in my bookcase, like, you'll kind of find a lot of graphic novels, and you'll find largely fiction. But there's something like on my Kindle, at least, I have like a lot of nonfiction, and I think it's really helping me to kind of and this book in particular, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, and clearly you've read it as well.
Yeah.
I think it's really essential reading for a lot of us.
Right. And you mentioned graphic novels. So what kind of
Yeah.
graphic novels?
So right now, there are, like, if you can see, there is this book called Sapiens. So I
Yeah.
had read it on the Kindle, but I wanted to get the graphic novel. So I'm reading the graphic novel version of that as well.
Yeah.
And Persepolis, of course, is like a classic. Uh, Persepolis and Mouse, and I have some Agatha Christie's also, like graphic novel versions of Agatha Christie's.
Are you are you
So
a are you a fan of Watchmen?
not really. I
Okay.
have read, but I mean, I've read a lot of graphic novels and Watchmen, and a lot of other things which I've read during my FTII final year, because I was writing. We had to submit an essay at the end of our third year course, and I did my essay, my dissertation on graphic novels and how graphic novels and what graphic novels and editing have in common. Mm, so, in the sense that if if you look at graphic novels, they're actually great storyboards. So that's the perspective with which I was approaching, and that's where my fascination with graphic novels also lies.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff that unfortunately we don't get in print. For instance, I discovered there's a comic book called Supremo,
Yes.
which was based on Amitabh Bachchan. And I discovered that very recently. Unfortunately, there are no hard copies that one could find. So I'm reading them as PDFs as of now.
Excellent. Excellent. I've recently started falling in love with hardcovers, and
Yes,
yeah, the entire experience is more
is very different. Yeah,
yeah, how should I say, more tangible. You feel like
I agree.
it's
I
like it's
agree.
coming out of the book.
Yeah,
I don't know, I might
yeah.
sound like kya bol raha hai, but like
No, I completely agree. I think the hardcover experience is definitely
yeah.
more expensive, but worth it.
Yeah. So apart from reading and apart from watching Tooth Pari, what is it that you currently watched, or what is it that you're watching or finished watching? And it can be anything.
I
It can be a
Yeah,
series or a
I
movie.
just finished watching, a friend had recommended watching this series called Blackbird on Apple TV. And it's kind of like in the Mindhunter zone. But really, like, it's the kind of thing I love watching. It's dark and it's a very dense narrative and amazing performances, and just technically so sound that I think one of the things that we really overlook in Indian content is sound and sound design. And the more I watch shows like Blackbird, it really kind of reaffirms the concept of using sound to further the narrative, versus just putting bird ambiences and putting car horns and stuff, which is what in India, I think we tend to just use sound as just like a layer that, okay, give a sound designer 20 days to just do a series and, you know, uh, put bird sounds and car sounds.
Right.
But there's so much more to be done with it.
Yeah.
And I think that is really what I've been kind of looking at while watching these shows.
Right. Did you watch Everything Everywhere All at Once?
Of course, I
Yeah.
watched that. That's one of the few films I watched in the theater. I'm really like, it really bothers me to go to theaters, honestly. So I sadly avoid because it really makes me angry when people talk on the phone, and there are
Thank
kids
you. Thank
shouting.
you. Thank
Yeah,
you.
I
Thank
just and I get into a fight every time. So and then end credits just kind of go off, or the projection is not great, or the sound is not great. It really bothers me. So I have a large TV at home. I just watch on that. I don't have the patience to, I mean, even though I work in the industry, and I shouldn't say it, but I don't have the patience to go to a
you. No,
theater
that's
because, like, I think it ruins your experience. If there's someone who's breaking up with someone else on the phone
yeah.
next to you, it's unnecessary.
And first of all, thank you for saying this. People, I'm not a mad guy. Please, it's a thing. So, so like I recently watched Evil Dead Rise in the theaters,
Yeah,
which if you get the chance, please go to the theater and
I
watch.
would love to. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, because excellent sound design, like you just mentioned, and the editing
yeah.
is, of course, fantastic. But the same experience I had while watching Evil Dead Rise. It's a horror movie, for God's sake. I mean, come on. The least that you can do is be slightly serious. But it seems that horror films in India, I don't know what has happened, be it Indian horror or be it Western horror, they are not getting the audiences in theaters. People just come, and apart from watching the film, they do everything else. They do everything else.
Yeah, it's interesting you should say that, because I remember I was watching and I love horror, the genre as such. I love horror and I love the zombie genre of zombie films. So I remember watching, I think it was one of the Conjuring films in the theater. And the strangest reaction was that people were laughing, and men largely were laughing at the scary bits, which is obviously, I mean, it's a defense mechanism. So one appreciates the the sentiment behind it, but it's not a good experience for me. If you're going to be laughing at the points that I want to experience, the filmmakers worked really hard to create those moments for you to feel a certain way. And yeah, it really bothers me. I think it's very, very hard for me to watch like good films in theaters. But yeah, everything everywhere I did. I made the effort to go to a
Yeah.
theater.
And like when I watched Everything Everywhere, there are so many moments like that film. I feel, and of course, I would love to know your thoughts. That film is like a film school of editing in its own. You understand that editing can play such a good role. And what's the most fascinating is that it was edited on Premiere Pro by a bunch of four
Hmm.
guys. Two of them are the directors, Daniels. So, coming to this, I would love to know what are your thoughts on this thing ki software matters versus software doesn't matter at all, and what are you currently using as your software, your arsenal for doing the edits?
So yeah, for me, software doesn't matter at all. We at FTII, we kind of actually before FTII also in Xavier's, we were doing like working on really basic, where we had these deck here and a recorder there, and you would just have to kind of you could just insert shots one after the other, and you couldn't do much, and you had like those vision mixers to kind of do transitions, and it was very basic digital linear editing. And every time you transferred material from one tape to the other, there'd be a generation loss. So that was back in the day. Then I worked in Bombay briefly, and then we worked. That's where I was introduced to the Avid. Back then, people were extensively just using the Avid Media Composer. And then when I went to film school, we learned for, I think, all our exercises for the 3 years were on the Steam Deck. And so we are working with actually with prints and work prints. And we got a fair bit of input on with Avid, and Final Cut Pro had just come in at that point, Final Cut Pro 7. And so we had, it was like this whole strange new beast that we were getting introduced to. And then once we started working professionally, it was either Avid or Final Cut Pro. For the longest time, I was using Final Cut Pro, and then it's of course now obsolete. But now I think once Final Cut Pro went out of my life, I just was like, okay, I'll work with whatever software, because the other thing is things keep changing now. Workflows keep changing. The software keeps evolving. Sometimes something stop working for you. Like Final Cut Pro X, for instance, I have not been able to wrap my head around it at all. I know a lot of people edit on Resolve. I have not been able to do that, and I don't think workflows um, on Final Cut Pro X and Resolve really lend themselves to the kind of work that we do. So by and large, most of us, we work on either Avid or Premiere Pro. And I'm happy working on either Avid or Premiere Pro, to be honest. So I feel like, I mean, these are means to an end. You can't, it's like, what pen would you use to write? You have to write. You can use a pen, you can use a pencil, you can use a computer. So it's as simple as that, really. I think that's one thing I've stopped stressing over.
So it's more about getting the job done instead of thinking ki yaar kisse karna hai, kya
Yeah.
karna hai. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, there are some things definitely. For instance, one of the shows that my team has started working on, and I will join them soon, hopefully, is very heavy on graphics. So, in which case, Premiere Pro is an easier software far as that is concerned, if there's a lot of text involved. Avid it's slightly clunkier with those things. But Avid, for instance, on Tooth Pari was fabulous because we were a very large edit team. And I think we were also like, we were working through COVID um, uh, at the time that Protein was shooting. So we weren't working in studios, and I had made sure that the editors who were working for me had access to the machines at their place. So Avid is really good with media management. So, you know, if you have a large team and you're sharing project files like through across the city, it links up really well. Premiere's a little harder in that way. So yeah, that way I think it depends on the project as well.
Right. And did you watch RRR?
I did, yes. Not in theaters though. Not in
Okay.
theaters. Yeah.
Okay.
This was at home. Yeah.
Okay. And your thoughts on the film? Just wanted to know because
I understand why the film works.
yeah.
It's not a film that I would seek out personally.
Okay.
I think the spectacle of it and everything, the technicality of it is absolutely stunning. Is it a story that personally appeals to me? Not so much.
Right.
Because I think also it's not my zone at all.
Sure.
As a viewer, that's not the kind of film that I would, you know, seek out.
Sure. Sure. Speaking of the technicalities, do you think that there is like, have you noticed certain differences when it comes to how films in the South Indian cinema versus the Hindi cinema are edited? Because now South Indian films are everywhere, like, and it's not just about Tamil or Telugu. There is Kannada, there is Malayalam. Films in Tudu language are also releasing.
Yeah.
So, do you see something that the Hindi filmmakers do in their edits? The Hindi films are edited versus something that the South Indian films are doing. And yeah, I mean, I'm not saying which one do you like, but I just wanted to know, ki, as an editor, what is it that you have observed which is different between the two?
I think I would not, in the current scheme of things, I don't feel like there's a lot of difference. I would say, however, like back when I was in the institute and uh, we were just kind of exploring different kinds of cinema, of Indian cinema. The two editors, Anthony and Shrikar, I think their work is really has been standout because there's a lot of innovation in the way that they choose to tell the story, and the kind of, for instance, and this is not like it's more stylistic. It's not really driving the narrative in any way. But I remember watching one of a song that Anthony had edited, and you know, there was a kind of delayed dissolve that he had used, and it just gave like it was something I had not seen before in Indian cinema for sure. What Shrikar Prasad has done with Dil Chahta Hai, for instance. I think those are really the landmarks of editing in India. So, in many ways, I think that language that has been set up is what is informing us, you know, this our next generation of editors, so to speak. Currently, I think because so much of South cinema and Hindi cinema is kind of merging, and this idea of pan India, I think they call
Yeah.
it pan Indian or something like that. Yeah. So this concept is emerging. Then I think it leaves very little scope to have different, like, you know, different kinds of editing. You know, it is speaking to a common audience. So there is a little bit, you know, you're fusing the two kinds of, and not only editing, but I would say storytelling, because editing is also dependent on writing and direction, right?
True. True.
So the storytelling itself, I think you're kind of fusing the kind of storytelling, and you're using the ethos of what South films, you know, there's a kind of the way they are rooted to their culture, to their narrative, the narratives that have existed for years. There's a strong sort of connect that they have with their roots. I think with Hindi cinema, it's very uh, derivative of like largely North India. It caters to North Indian audiences more, and it's got that whole like most characters are Punjabi or North Indian upper caste. So that is the tendency. And the aspirational, we I think dabble more with aspirational cinema. And whereas a lot of South films, and in the last few years, I think if you look at the top films made in Malayalam cinema or Tamil cinema, um, they're all films that speak to their roots. Whether if you look at Great Indian Kitchen, for instance, it's at a elementary level of what happens in every household, and they've really gone there instead of moving outwards and seeing like actors in foreign going to foreign countries or characters based in London.
Yeah.
That's not what they're really doing. So that I think more with this pan-Indian kind of storytelling, one can hope that these are the stories you're really, going to explore. And then, of course, if it informs the editing or the sound or the camera work, then that's great. But I think what is, really being affected and is evolving is the idea of the film.
Yeah. So, since we are talking about a lot of different choices that editors make in order to tell the story and sometimes even elevate the story so that it reaches the audience in a certain impactful way. So, I would like to go back to the time when you got an opportunity to be an assistant editor for Ghajini. So, first of all, I would
Yeah.
like to know that how did you get this chance?
So this was through a friend of a friend, and he was an associate editor on Ghajini, Nishant, and he knew me through someone else, and he was looking for an assistant editor who could manage. So Ghajini was being edited by Anthony, but he preferred working in Chennai itself, and he wasn't here in Bombay a lot. So essentially, the edit was happening in Chennai, and the back end processes were happening here, like the exports and stuff like that were happening here. So he basically, Nishan needed someone who could do the exports and just manage all this. So Nishant is, let's say, making changes. Once Anthony has done his changes there, he would sit with Amir sir and make the changes here. And then the exports have to go to various departments. So I was the person that he employed for that purpose. And I think, yeah, it was the first big project I did out, just, getting out of the film school. And so I was completely at sea. I think
Yeah.
that was my second film school in a sense, because I think what a lot of us don't realize when we're in film school is that we are not really following a professional workflow there. A film school is a very different journey. It's not a place that is telling you, I will get you a placement. So this is exactly what you have to do. It's, I think, way beyond all that. When you start working professionally, uh, you have to be in a very different frame of mind, firstly. You can't be in a film school frame of mind. And that was the biggest learning for me. It was an unlearning, actually.
Hmm.
So yeah, I think I was on the project for almost 6 to 8 months, and because I was really really slow in terms of the operations. I was very slow in understanding certain workflows. So there were times, and I think I would solely blame myself for that. I would not go home for 2 days, 3 days, because I was still trying to grasp what everything was all about.
Right.
So yeah, I think that was a very critical and very crucial film for me.
I'm sure. I'm sure. And like I just mentioned, I revisited a couple of scenes in Ghajini, and that time I was a kid, but now when I've started gaining some knowledge of what is truly happening and that sense of I realize there are so many editing decisions that have been taken in the entire film, in almost an entire scene. Like the most common one is, and please correct me if I'm wrong. I'm still a learner. So like when the action is to take place, the shots, the speed of the story is like slow, and when
Hmm.
the action happens, it's like uh the speed increases of someone hitting a punch and then coming back. It's basically
Yeah,
like, you won't call it a time lapse, but you are still giving
yeah,
that a little bit push to the scene. The motion
yeah,
of that scene has increased.
yeah,
So, and then there are so many other choices of montage, of the songs, of the JNL cuts and whatnot. And I think I should stop doing the talking and ask you to give us a quick, like a quick vocabulary of how of words that actually help a regular viewer to witness, notice, and appreciate certain editing choices, certain things, certain decisions that you make. Can you just give like a quick list of definitions, a vocabulary which is very handy for anyone to, say, ki, Acha, okay, this is that. Oh, this was, I know what this is. Because
yeah,
like you said, and we all know that now that people are not watching films or stories through the lens of the camera, they are rather watching it through the lens of Instagram. So people actually tend to miss these choices, which sometimes
yeah,
you don't
yeah,
know how they have arrived to that decision, because
yeah,
you really don't know what happened in the background. So it would be great if you can
yeah.
throw some light on that.
So I think largely edit decisions firstly. I think let's start there. As I said, edit decisions can't really be separated from writing and directorial decisions, because it's really like sometimes you'll say, oh, it's a great edit, but by and large, that's also because it's really well written. So writing, direction, and editing are very, very closely linked, and you can't really say where one ends and the other begins. So having said that, I think most editorial decisions, for instance, are based on one is performance. So invariably, you'll find like in a particular scene, there is one performance which kind of is a standout and you want to see more of. So there's what we sometimes do is uh, if we want to really kind of stay on that character's face and see the character's eyes, we underlay other voices um, below that person's reaction, kind of stay on that person's reaction and underlay the other voices below that. So that is one technique that we use. There is, of course, like everyone knows, dissolves and fades and stuff like that, which is I'm not a fan of dissolves and fades because I think we don't really know how to use dissolves and fades, and that's why I said that Anthony's use of dissolve, the kind of delayed dissolve that he had done, really stood out for me because that's the first time I had personally seen a dissolve being used for something other than a transition. There's a tendency amongst filmmakers, like a lot of times I ask director or whatever that so what is the transition you have in mind over here, and they say, oh, we'll fade out and we'll fade in again, or we'll dissolve to the next. And these are like, these really dated techniques now. So I think that evolution of dissolves and fades, and what is the purpose of a fade or what is the purpose of a dissolve. And I've seen this with assistant editors also, randomly they'll just put a dissolve in between scenes. So I think that is, I mean, people use dissolves and fades. I'm not a fan. What else would we say? Uh, you will see in Tooth Pari, for instance, there's in I think the second episode, if I'm not wrong, there's a very interesting split screen that has been used. Um, Now that has been done by, we had I had editors who were kind of working on each episode and doing the first cut of each episode. So the editor of that particular episode had done this, and we kind of retained that style. I don't think we've done split screens in any other episode. It's probably the only one which has that style of, where Rumi is traveling in a cab and this other girl Srila is also traveling a cab, and it's kind of showing simultaneity, where one is heading somewhere and you hope the other person is, without giving spoilers, you hope that she reaches that place and on time and all of it. So I think that use of split screen has been done very intelligently. Um, and split screen, I think, typically we use with phone calls and stuff. That is a usual way of using a split screen, which is why I felt this particular usage was kind of different and really aided the narrative. And then, of course, then there are things like we use a lot of jump cuts. Nowadays, more so. Unfortunately, now jump cuts are being used to save time. Um, because with the OTT and with films in general, we are really always being told to reduce the duration of the film or reduce the duration of the series so that more audiences, will want to watch. So initially, if you watch like Dil Chahta Hai, for instance, the use of jump cuts was done very musically, and it was done to kind of enhance certain moments, versus now, as I said, where a lot of times it's something we're resorting to just to save time. So yeah, I think these are largely some of the techniques that we are using in editing.
Excellent. So I hope this is helpful for anyone who actually notices something and not just let it ignore, just appreciate it a little more, appreciate the work that you guys do. Uh, I you mentioned something which has been in my head for a very long time, is the importance of music in editing. Music, I think, plays a great role, not just like you just said कि you don't just have to put a layer of music कि हाँ यार कुछ नहीं है तो चला दो यार, ठीक है, ऐसा नहीं है. You need to make, you need to add music at the right time.
Yeah.
So I would love to know your thoughts about how music truly elevates storytelling, and how would you define the usage of music and the importance of
Hmm.
music in editing?
So to begin with, I would say that currently editors are being expected to put music and do a certain amount of sound design. So if anyone's kind of considering turning to editing, for instance, you have to really know your music. You have to really know the right kind of sounds that have access to the right kind of sounds, because with sound also, like, the wrong kind of sound can affect a cut point. For instance, like if a lot of times, and going back to your earlier question, another kind of technique that we kind of use is, instead of doing a visual transition, you do a sound transition, like a pressure cooker, or if you remember, there was this film called The Bone Collector,
Hmm.
and it had this gorgeous transition where a girl scream, a girl who's about to be killed, her scream transitions into the sound of an ambulance. And it's been done many times since then, but a Bone Collector was, like, I think way back, early 2000s probably, or late 90s probably. That was the first time I had heard something like this. So anyway, these are the kind of things that we try to incorporate even at an offline edit level, because when we are sending cuts to the network, the edit has to be almost as good as, a final finished product. So sound and music, going back to your question, are very critical in that and shaping the edit. With music in particular, I don't really cut to music. I think there is another tendency we have, because we have this culture of songs, and choreographed songs. And in choreographed songs, you cut to the music, you cut the edit to the music. I think there's a tendency to even replicate that when cutting montages, that you start cutting to the music. And we have to understand that this is reference music that we are using, and which belongs to another film or some other album, and that's not the final music that you will eventually have. Um, so cutting to reference music is something I would not do, but I would definitely use reference music to underline the tonality of the scene. Like, what is it that is this scene trying to, for instance, in Tooth Pari, um, what are you, is the scene a fun scene? For instance, in the first episode, when Rumi is taking this guy into a hotel room, it could be any number of things. It could be fun, but you also feel like there's something not quite right. There is an underlying mystery to it. So the kind of music that we had used in the reference is a slightly like a Latin American kind of a vibe is there, which is a playful sort of a vibe. And then we had done like a little bit of a transition when she begins to just bite the guy. We've done a little bit of transition with the music and with sound over there. So these are the kind of choices that we are making in the edit. Sometimes they're retained by the background music composer, sometimes they're not retained, but at least they give the network an idea of the tonality of that particular scene. That is it. And also, like with Tooth Pari, for instance, most of the reference music was very pulpy. Like there was a lot of Tarantino OSTs that were used, that I had used, because that is the zone is pulpy. It's not this very a show that takes itself very seriously. So that's the thing that I think it's just about, for me, use of music is to dictate the tone of a particular scene.
Speaking of transitions, so I wanted to highlight two examples. One of my favorite transitions right now is the match cut. I feel it is the most creative way you
Yeah.
are telling a story. And you also, I think, used a match cut when the character of Adil Hussain is wearing his glasses versus uh, the lead character wearing the
Is
glasses.
like, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah,
it's a very
yeah,
small thing, but it just
yeah,
gives a good
yeah,
feeling. And also,
yeah.
there is this movie After Sun, which is a very
Hmm. Yes.
which is a very prominent film. So there is that one big dissolve transition about the character of Callum. I'm sure you must have seen it. And like you were speaking of dissolve, so instantly that
Yeah.
came to my mind. Ki
Yeah.
this is a great use of dissolve.
Yeah, exactly. That I think the use again of dissolves or anything else, even music, it can't be because there has to be something. There has to be a larger purpose that all these elements serve. Um, so I think that is really what one is trying to explore currently, and I think in the current landscape, there is a lot of opportunity to explore these ideas.
Right. And since we are talking about, like you mentioned, we are talking about some of the best scenes. So I wanted to know from you, ki, if someone has to like really like we always make a list of the best movies with the best cinematography or anything. So do you have your own list of the best edited films that you would like to share, which are fun, but they are also educational at the same time, showing you a different perspective of doing something?
Not really, because I really feel, as I said, that editing in isolation is it's very difficult for anyone to understand what is a well edited film. Uh, because something can't be well edited in isolation.
So
It'll be, a combination of writing, direction, and
yeah.
yeah, carry
No,
on.
no, no. So sorry to cut you, but I think
No, no.
what I wanted to really ask is, do you have certain sequences in mind that you feel ki these are some great edit sequences, and you have to see the kind of cuts that have been done? Some
Hmm.
any sequence in films, if not films, but like certain
Hmm.
sequences, just say Edgar Wright has his own style of, I don't know what you call it, but you know what I'm talking about. So, do
Yeah.
you have certain scenes or sequences where the editing is fantastic and you say ki yaar ye dekho, this is something that we would love to do?
For me, of course, there are films. I mean, there'd be the obvious, like a Guy Ritchie film, where the edit is very obvious. And I think, or the tendency for most of us to like the edits in a sequence is when edits are very obvious and in your face. So, a Guy Ritchie film, for instance, has very obvious kind of great cuts. For me, what is also, I think, gradually, I'm also learning to appreciate invisible cuts. So of which, I mean, if you ask me, Satyajit Ray's films are just, there's a mastery in the way these films are put together. His films are put together. What I also watch for editing in particular are music videos. um yeah as for instance, any of if you watch Sia's music videos, and there are also these little ads that directors do, which are like 4 minute, 5 minute ads. I think those are really where the true power of editing is seen, because you're telling these stories and you're uh, creating entire arcs in the span of 4 minutes, 5 minutes, sometimes lesser. So music videos and ads are really, I think, a very active playground for interesting editing.
Right. And since we are running short of time, I'll just quickly wrap up with a few of my questions, which I would request you to please be here for that, because I don't know when I'll get the next chance. I hope I get the next chance to speak with you. But so first of all, every individual who is working in a particular discipline always aspires to complete a dream project or projects. For example, when it comes to cinematographers, there is going to be a particular shot or a particular time of the day where the lighting is perfect and they want to shoot that particular scene. For an actor, it is that dream role of playing a person that has a particular sensibility or an emotion. So as an editor, is there any project or is there any kind of editing output that you aspire to bring to a project? Ki this is something that I really, really want to do.
I've for the longest time I wanted to do these crime shows and procedurals and stuff. And the last 2 3 years, I think for very fortunately, I'm very lucky that way that I got a bunch of these shows like Delhi Crime Season 2. I got Rudra. I got Tooth Pari to really do different types of the you can say that the genre for like Rudra and Delhi Crime Season 2 is similar because it's crime, both are crime
Yeah.
shows,
Yeah.
but the treatment is so different. And that is what is challenging actually. The genres themselves are not the challenge, but it's the iterations, the way you treat them, that's the thing. So I think, I mean, I don't really plan too much also. I like to kind of keep my, see what comes my way. And also very boring thing for me is that, I mean, boring answer to your question is also that, see, I never had imagined that I'd even last this long. So at this point, just waking up every day and being able to do what I do is actually everything. So everything else that comes after that is a bonus. So I don't really plan too much in terms of what I'd like to do
And
beyond this.
just to tell you, this is not a boring answer. This is an absolutely amazing answer. This is an absolutely amazing answer because it is inspiring in itself. And like you just mentioned that like we all are in the business of creativity, and something that always happens with people who want to do something creative or are in the process of doing something creative is that the people who are like, for example, if I make a video which gets 100 comments, जो बहुत time से हुआ नहीं है guys, I mean what are you doing, but खैर, so if it gets 100 comments, there are 95 people who will just praise me and appreciate me and whatnot, but there are those 5 people who will say something which, I don't know, it just takes off that 95 people का अच्छा बात की यार उन्होंने appreciate किया है. But no, I'm going to look more at those 5 people. So
Hmm.
if you meet those 5 people in your life, how do you deal with them?
I think on again, this sounds like a very boring answer, but it's true that I am like, I would probably deal with them the same way that I deal with the remaining 95. Because for me, I mean, for instance, now let's just say reviews, for instance, no, like when people are critiquing your film or whatever you've worked on, I enjoy reading the nasty ones. Uh, and I feel to an extent there's more to learn from that. They may not be 100% justified in what they're saying, but I think it helps to keep you grounded. It's very easy in the kind of work that we do to start taking yourself very seriously. And I think those five comments are what would keep me grounded and would, get me back to, zero, and try to do better, try to improve myself, because I will have that at the back of my mind. Having said that, it honestly, I mean, it's not something that is a make or break or that impacts me, that or anything like that. I'm like, I'm very I don't kind of go by anyone's opinion, because I think it's just ultimately you have to live your life the way you have to live.
Right. Okay. Few of my final questions. So, what is the advice that you would give to someone who wants to work as a film editor? And you recommend something in terms of how one should perceive the art of editing when getting started?
The advice for film editor is very difficult, because you can't really say in one line, oh, this is what the job is, कि तुम्हें रोज एक खाता मेंटेन करना है और उसमें 1+1 2 करना है. It's not like that. uh, Most days are very different from each other. And the of course, like, one obvious requirement is that you should know your software, for instance, and you should have a basic idea of how to piece together a narrative. um, you have to be prepared for long hours. So that is one very critical aspect. I think something that we're all struggling to understand at this point is when we say long hours, and we are also discussing mental health at the same time. Like, I've had people who are just starting off as an editors, who ask, what are the kind of hours we'll have to keep. Now, if you ask me that question, I can't tell you. It's entirely up to the job, what needs to be done on that particular day to achieve a certain goal. But then they'll be like, oh, we want to know for, because for mental health reasons. And it's really difficult at this point to find that balance. I would love for instance, my own team, I would love for them to have all the time in the world. And we do try to, like, for instance, make sure each of us get one day off. But beyond that, a lot of things really spiral out of control a lot of times. So it's a very unpredictable field. Um, and you have to enjoy that unpredictability. I think that's, I mean, the best that one can say.
And can people expect good paychecks after a certain period of time?
So, it depends what good is. It's also very relative,
Yeah.
to different people. Like, what may be a starter level for me may be very good for someone, because they're coming from a certain circumstance. And also, I think we all have to understand that we are not, it is still a disorganized industry. So you're not going to get like pension funds, you're not going to get like your provident funds and all, which is what corporates get. So in comparison to that, you're definitely not getting, even at the top of the rung, you're not getting that unless you're on the corporate side of filmmaking. But I mean, I find that answer really depends on what you think is enough.
Okay. All right. So, we all know that Rome wasn't built in a day, and it's a cliche, but we all know that. And we all have witnessed the experiences of women entering the workforce, regardless of their fields, regardless of their disciplines. A pretty recent example is Priyanka Chopra, who keeps highlighting the disparities of equal pay for women in the Indian film industry. Since you have a rich industry experience and are aware of the ins and outs, how do you feel about the current industry circumstances for women who want to get their foot in the door? Do you think that it is better or it needs to be better?
Um, so I mean, I'm really confused, honestly, because as I said, I just visited the Film Institute in Pune, and I realized that the class I was teaching, there were no women. And this has been a recurring sort of factor. Like, there haven't been a lot of women applying to film institutes for editing, particularly. I'm also finding fewer, for instance, assistants who are women. So I don't know what it is that it doesn't probably feel very welcoming for women anymore, even though a lot of the best editors we have and we have had in the past as well have been women. So I don't know what factor it is that is kind of changing for them, but I think it's editing is one place where it's by and large very comfortable for women and men to coexist, because it is entirely merit based. It's not, something that I mean, there are things like action films will largely go to men. There are those little things that are one always observes, but now increasingly you're finding that even action films and films that were typically edited by men are also, there are women also who are kind of being invited to participate in those kind of films. But I think pay wise also, it's not like the men are getting paid more and the women are getting paid less. I do feel, however, in terms of communication and feedback, there is always a surprise at the other end if the woman is very decisive or is very opinionated. I think that is something that the industry is still not prepared for. And I see that a lot in with editors, for instance, because I see my male counterparts are very clear about certain things. They're not ashamed of asking for certain things. When the woman does the same, there is a bit of, oh, we didn't expect this from you, because women are supposed to be, little soft and sensitive and all of that. So that, but I think is not peculiar to our industry. I think that is the way we are culturally. But other than that, I think, I mean, it's a great space for if women do want to be editors, for instance. It's a great time and it's a great space to be in right now.
Absolutely. And like you mentioned action movies, I would like to close this chat by just sharing something personal with you. And I can't believe that I've always wanted to do this. I'm getting this chance. Thank you so much. So speaking of women directors, you just mentioned action movies. Margaret Sixel, she's a very well-known action film director. And for the people who are watching, Margaret Sixel is the editor of Mad Max Fury Road. Now, Mad Max Fury Road is a full-blown action film, and it is one of my favorite action films of all time.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And Antara, but you know what? What truly makes it the best is the editing of that film.
Yeah.
Like the locations, the costumes, the acting, of course, it's Oscars and everything. But for me, the editing and the music is what makes it
Yeah.
fantastic. And
Yeah.
it is done by a woman, which was, by the
Yeah.
way, her very first action film that she edited. And she is George Miller's wife. So George was
Yeah.
very supportive ki yaar, try karte hain, let's see how a woman will perceive the film. And you have this fantastic product for the world.
Yeah.
So today I got a chance to speak to a woman who has been a part of this industry for so long. And thank you so much once again, Antara, for all these insights.
Thank you.
And I mean, there is this thing that a creator like me who has just 12,000 subscribers was feeling ki yaar, who will say yes to you? I mean, come on, you don't have subscribers, you don't have, and you are talking of, talking to people who have edited films and whatnot. What are you doing? But people like you are making this thing happen for me. So I'm very grateful for this opportunity.
No,
Thank
no,
you so much.
absolutely.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you, Paulish.